Let's pray. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, after about a year after Nikki and I were married, we decided to adopt a cat. If you truly want to test a relationship, get a cat. Now, I got to say this up front. In those days of old, I was not really a cat person. I was, if I'm honest, I would have to say I'm more of a dog person. However, love being what love is, and giving all and doing all for another person, I decided to give this cat thing a try. Now, Nikki had done all the research. She had found a cat rescue that rescued cats from Puerto Rico. Apparently, there's an abundance of cats in Puerto Rico. And so we adopted a Spanish-speaking cat. I guess you could say we're a multicultural family. Now, this organization rounds up the strays and they give them the medical attention that they need. They spay or neuter them and then make them available to folks like us to adopt. I support adopting animals rather than buying them from the pet store or a breeder. Now, we didn't know at the time that there's a fabulous cat adoption organization right here in Hull, the Seaside Animal Rescue. So if you're interested, check them out. They're just down the street. A year ago, we did the pet blessing. I went there and blessed all the cats that were there at the time. I can't really vouch for the ones that are there now, but the ones that before were blessed, so they were probably okay. So anyway, we decided to go and have a look. I remember my wife saying, my darling wife, whom I love dearly, saying, we'll just go and look. Which I knew meant we're coming home with one. So just as an aside, we've been married, it'll be 6 years in June. And you learn a lot in those early days, right? I recall the first year, and we were approaching her birthday, and I said, what would you like for your birthday? She said, oh, I don't want anything. Which I found out later doesn't really mean that. But anyways, we went to go and have a look. We drove to Bourne. Yes, that's on the other side of one of those bridges that connects the rich with the poor. Just south of here. Now, we weren't there long, and as you can imagine, we came home with a cat. I quickly learned humans don't own cats. Cats own humans. Dogs show love and affection towards their owners, whilst cats hold us in what looks like disdain. Cats tolerate you as long as you feed them and change their box once in a while. They will not cut you with their razor-sharp nail while you sleep. All kidding aside, our little guy has truly become part of the family. And as much as I hate to admit it, I've become a cat person. Now, we only have a few rules in our house when the cat is concerned. I say rules. I think they're rules, but he thinks they're more of suggestions or guidelines. Chief among them is the rule that he cannot be on the table or the countertops. Now, this is a pretty clear rule, right? So basically, any flat surface. Just don't go on the flat surfaces. However, cats seem to be more about the spirit of the law than the letter of the law. We'll get back to him in a moment. Now, we have a similar situation in today's gospel from Matthew. Now, I'm sure when Matthew wrote this, he did not have this unintentional consequence of it being referred to as cats, but here it is. Jesus sounds very legalistic in these verses. In fact, I have often avoided this passage, especially because of the last part of this passage. I've often avoided it. But I figured today I would jump headlong into this and see where we go. Now, he seems legalistic, but I would suggest that it's actually the very opposite. Jesus is being very pastoral in his approach, because this is really about how we are to interact with each other. This passage comes from the Sermon on the Mount. In fact, it's the last part. We've dealt with the first two the last couple of weeks. This is the last part of it. Now, Matthew has spent a lot of time laying out what Jesus thinks and believes in all of this and how we are to live with one another. Now, one thing I want to make abundantly clear. Nowhere in these passages about the Sermon on the Mount does Jesus say anything about what we are to believe. The sermon is not about what to believe. The words that Jesus shared is about how we are to live and love each other. Because if we cannot do what he's suggesting here, then belief doesn't matter. If we can't love and serve each other, the rest just doesn't matter. But, and I want to make this point clear as well, there needs to be a balance between how we live and love each other and what we believe. One should inform and enhance the other, and vice versa. Now, Jesus begins with the big one. And I'm not sure we need to spend a lot of time on murder, because I don't believe any of you here, because you probably wouldn't be here if you committed murder. However, I don't think anybody here has done that. But Jesus says that we shouldn't do this. Like, you would think that would not be obvious, right? Do not murder, he says. Why? Because you will be liable to the judgment. Okay. Then he quickly shifts gears, and he starts to talk about being angry, using insults, and calling your brother or sister names. All of these things will lead to judgment. The point that Jesus is trying to make here is that there are other ways to murder someone other than by physically taking their life. We can murder someone by taking their reputation away. We take their reputation away by slander and gossip. Now remember, Jesus brought a radical way of living, and that includes not only reconciliation with God, but reconciliation with our brothers and sisters. You will remember that in Jewish liturgical law, one became reconciled with God through a sacrifice that they brought to the altar. The size of the sacrifice was equal to the size of what you had done. You might see someone carrying a pigeon. You might see someone bringing an elephant. Not really, but you get the idea. But Jesus says that before you can do this, before you can bring your sacrifice to be reconciled with God, you have to be reconciled with each other. In our context, before you present yourself for communion, we need to be reconciled with God and with each other. He says it pretty clear. If you hold anything against your brother and sister, or you know that they hold something against you, leave your offering, go and be reconciled, and then come back. This is the only way it's going to work. Now, Jesus then moves on to other issues that we really won't dwell upon other than the parts about plucking out one's eyes and lopping off one's hands. Now, this is one of those times that you will thank me for not being a biblical literalist. And I understand that not everything that Jesus said was to be taken literal. So please, don't pluck out your eyes or cut off your hands. I know it sounds silly that has to be said, but someone will say, look, Pastor said I got to cut my hand off. Lump, off it goes. No one has ever followed anything I say that close. Thanks be to God. So we're not taking this literally. We're not really talking about plucking out our eyes and cutting off our hands. We're talking about ridding ourselves of those things that cause us to stumble, whatever it happens to be. Now, the other thing that I'll say about this is that you are responsible for yourself. No one leads you anywhere. You go there. No one can make you angry. You allow yourself to be angry. No one can cause you to lust. You allow yourself to do that. It's no one else's fault but your own. I know it's fashionable these days to blame other people for everything. But it's really not. It's really not. Not in our Christian way of understanding these things. So a couple of years ago, a Japanese woman took America by storm when she said, if it does not bring you joy, get rid of it. I understand divorces went sky high after she had said that. But no, Marie Kondo was talking about decluttering your life and was asking us to consider if items bring you joy or bring you pain. In her idea of decluttering, you picked up an item. And if it didn't immediately bring you joy, you were to just cast it aside. But if it brought you joy, you kept it. I tried this, and everything I touched brought me joy, so I never got rid of it. So again, if they bring you joy, keep them. If they bring you pain, get rid of them. Jesus is saying a similar thing. Whatever causes you to stumble, get rid of it. Easier said than done. But this is what we strive towards. We strive towards this idea. Now, the last part of what Jesus is saying here is all about integrity. He says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Now, those of you who come to Bible study know that I don't like the book of Revelation. I don't like it at all. I think it's crazy. I think when John wrote it, he was doing a little something he probably shouldn't have been doing. I think he was out there. I think it's been misused. I think it's been abused. I think it's caused an awful lot of harm in the world. With that said, however, there is one particular verse when the writer, using God's voice, is talking about being lukewarm. And I think it fits here because your yes should be yes, your no should be no. The passage is something along the lines of, if you are lukewarm, I will vomit you out of my mouth. It's a pretty clear vision there, isn't it? You don't want to be lukewarm. When your yes is yes, let it be yes. If it's no, let it be no. Now, if you're like me, you have trouble saying no, so you say yes a lot of things, and then, as my wife will remind you, some things don't get done. As I often say, you don't have to remind me every 6 months that I need to do something. It will eventually get done. And it does, eventually, right? But it's all about integrity. And these days, it seems like integrity is a movable feast, right? It depends on who's talking about it. No one is to blame for anything. It's always someone else's fault or forces outside of our control. I didn't hit that pole. That pole hit me. Clearly, someone else put those documents with the large classified stamp on them in my garage. I didn't do it. However, it seems like everybody's doing it, so I would urge you, when you go home today, go through all your stuff, and just once and for all, let's make sure we don't have anything, all right? If I say I didn't do it, I can't be held accountable for it. If you repeat a lie enough, it becomes the truth. And this has become a problem. Now, the part that bothers me most about all of this is that those who call themselves Christians seem to be the worst at taking responsibility for their actions. They feel that since Jesus forgives all, it gives them licenses to be jerks. Now, I chose a different word for the public setting. I have a different word in mind when I'm saying this. So I can go and do something, and then right after I do it, I can say, oh, Jesus, forgive me. And it's done. It's not really how it works. They can twist the scriptures to prove their point, no matter what it is. And if they cannot, they say, well, Jesus is being ambiguous about that. They'll go to Leviticus. I'm sure we've all read it, right? And there's those lovely passages in there about not wearing clothes made of two fabrics, not planting different crops next to each other, All of these things that we're not supposed to. How many of you are wearing the blended fabric right now? You're all sinners, and after this, we're going to take you out there and stone you to death. But they're very exact that this is what it means. But then when it comes to loving everyone, oh, well, he was ambiguous about that. He didn't really mean everyone. Because how can we possibly love everyone? We can't love them if we can't control them. So this has become a problem. This has become a big problem. Now, if you get my weekly email, and if you read it, because there's 2 steps to that process, getting it and reading it, I use the example of behavior of some of our elected officials at the most recent State of the Union address. If you didn't watch it like I did, you don't know what I'm talking about, just Google it, you'll find it. There's some great memes about the whole thing. Anyways. But I will say this. Our country has always been divided. Always. From the very beginning. We've always been divided. In fact, division is what led us to be a country. We're good at this. But we've always been divided. We just see it more because of television and social media. One of the most divisive presidential elections was the second one. Actually, it was the first one, but the second one was the most public one. It took months and the House of Representatives to decide the outcome. But then when it was finished, no one said, it didn't happen, fake news. They just got on with their lives. But today, this seems to be the exception to the rule. Today, it has become acceptable behavior. And many of the most grievous offenders of this claim to be followers of Jesus. Now, the first church I pastored, we had this thing we called the annual meeting, much like our charge conference. I didn't then and I don't now look forward to these meetings. Not that it happens here, but in other places I've been, these meetings usually turn into some sort of disagreement. It seems to be Festivus at every one of these things. We have the annual airing of grievances, most often directed at me. Perhaps that's why I don't like them. So in the first church I was in, I made the decision that the meeting would be held in the church rather than in the church hall. And we actually made the meeting part of the worship service. The way it was designed is that we had the worship service, and before the final blessing, we would have the meeting, we would sing the final hymn, and we would have the blessing, and off we would go. If you've been to one of our charge conferences, you'll see that that's really how they're structured. They're basically structured as a worship service with some business that tends to take place in there. And the idea is because whenever the church gathers, we gather for worship. Whether it's here, or it's in the building next door at fellowship time. We are worshiping because we are the people of God who have come together. So shortly after the first meeting had ended, a couple of people came to me objecting. I know it's hard to believe that people would object to something that happens in church, but objecting to the fact that we had the meeting in the church. And they felt that they couldn't say what they wanted to say because they were in church. And my response was, why would you say anything different outside of church than you would say inside church? It has to do with integrity. I know it's fashionable to sort of move with the wind. But our integrity should mean something. We need to stand for something. So our integrity, our reputation, our brand, if you will, is all that we have. And for many of us, it will be all that we're remembered for. How do you want to be remembered? We should strive to live our lives in such a way that at the end, people will say, wow, that was a bright one. Say yes when you mean yes, and no when you mean no. Stand firm in what you believe, but always leave room for growth. Now, I have a confession to make. There was a time in my life when I was not this progressive, free-thinking person that you see before you. I was a rigid letter of the law guy. On some issues, I'm still a little rigid, like loving everyone. But it took me time to come around. It took me time to understand that although there's the law, how we apply the law should be different. I like to say I'm in recovery from my past, and I have a lot to be forgiven for. But I don't think that I'm as rigid as I was, nor do I think that Christians should be rigid. Even Jesus changed his mind. When Jesus encountered the woman at the well, he dismissed her desire outright to learn more about the life-giving water that Jesus mentioned. In fact, he basically called her a dog. Now, he dismissed her not because she was a woman, but because she was a Samaritan. Now, she didn't just slink away. She challenged Jesus. She challenged Jesus on his belief. She challenged Jesus, if you will, on his racism. And Jesus changed his position. Jesus changed his mind. Jesus shared the gospel with her. Now, tradition tells us that her name was Photini. And she went on to be one of the greatest evangelists of her time. Because Jesus changed his mind. Jesus was open to what she had to say. Now, this is radical on two counts. It's radical because she was a Samaritan. But what's even more radical about this is that she was a woman. And Jesus listened to her, had compassion for her, and changed his position. There are some truths that can't be changed. There are some things that we believe. There are some things that are black and white, and there are some areas where there's some gray. But the Sermon on the Mount is not about what we believe, but rather about how we live, or at least how we're supposed to live. But now back to the cat, because I know you all know. Now, as I mentioned, he's much more of a spirit of the law rather than a letter of the law kind of cat. Now, you'll remember, the rule is, cannot be on the table or the countertop, any flat surface. However, if you leave something on the table, say a magazine or clean laundry, he will sit on that. And he will look at you as if to say, I'm not on the table, I'm on the laundry. I have not violated the law. And he'll look at you and say, if you hadn't left the laundry here, I wouldn't have the opportunity to be on it. So it's actually your fault. When I say that Jesus changed everything, I don't mean to say that Jesus did away with the law. In fact, last week, we heard him say rather explicitly that not one letter of the law will be changed. Jesus came to change the way we apply the law. We do not apply the law with a stick. We do not apply the law with chains. We do not apply the law with prisons. We apply the law with grace. We apply the law with mercy. And most importantly, we apply the law with love. Now, there's an old saying, well, at least I think it's old. And the saying goes something like, before you tell me what your church or faith believes, show me. Show me how you love everyone. Show me how you care for everyone. Show me how you advocate for those on the margins. Show me how you are the voice for the voiceless. Show me how you support the poor and the needy and the rich and the wealthy. Show me how you support everyone. And then we can sit down and have a talk about what you believe.